Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Zeke-ollege Football. I'm your host, as always, Zeke, and we had a very exciting week in week 7. Hard to believe we're already halfway through the season, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles. That's just the way this thing goes. Great week of football. Now, full transparency for the morning window, I was not able to really watch most of the games. So I had to rely on like afterwards, looking back on it. That being said, I did have a great time. I was at the UMass versus Missouri game, so that was a great showing for the Tigers. For the Minutemen, I mean it's UMass football. What do you expect here? But yeah, uh, I was lucky enough to actually go to a game this week. So great atmosphere. Everyone there was extremely nice. Um, but yeah, no, it was a great time. But you don't want to hear me talk about my game time experience. We can get to that in a little bit. But we had a fun thing start up last week, and I'm really looking forward to it again this week and for the weeks in the future. And that is midweek football. We had some Tuesday games, we had some Wednesday games, Thursday games, Friday games, Saturday games. There is college football galore, and I love it. It is fantastic. Um, you know, Tuesday night, we kicked off with some midweek CUS action. That's what I'm calling it. I'm calling it CUS action. It is a little derivative, but that's okay. Uh, but midweek CUS action, it's good. It is pretty enjoyable, but right now the quality of play, it's not the same as midweek action. I still feel like midweek action has that little edge over CUS action for now. It has that edge right now. I think Maction's still a better product. Um, but you're going to give me midweek football. I'm not going to complain about that, not in the slightest. Um, but yeah, we started off last week with a nice game on Tuesday night. It was Liberty against FIU, and good overtime game. But here's the thing: Liberty seems pretty vulnerable. This is not a great FIU team, if I'm going to be honest. They're 2-4, on the season. Their only other win in conference play was against Louisiana Tech. They've lost to Monmouth, an FCS school who's located in the CAA, but they still are able to take Liberty to overtime. Good for FIU. You want to be able to get a win there. And they had their opportunities. Don't get me wrong, they did. Um, but they just sort of squandered those opportunities just a little bit too much. Um, you know, just couldn't get it done in overtime. So a sack fumble ended it. Bit unfortunate. But Liberty, uh, hey, they're still undefeated. So again, the conference runs through Liberty right now, but still some other potential contenders coming up. And speaking of those potential contenders, let's talk about one of them, Western Kentucky. Uh, they went out this past week, throttled a pretty terrible UTEP team. Final score of 44-17. Now, Western Kentucky had those the infamous uh, the Hilltoppers have eyes helmets. That's what I call them. But they got Big Red's eyes, like these beady eyes staring out at you from the side of the helmet. So, little interesting detail there. But Western Kentucky playing pretty good football. They're 4-2 on the season, and they only have lost to Alabama to start off the season, and then a 1 point loss to Boston College on the road. But other than that, their schedule looks pretty winnable. You know, they have a tough game this week on Wednesday against Sam Houston on the road. But after that, they host Kennesaw State, travel to New Mexico State, another team that's struggling, uh, host Louisiana Tech, which, again, that's another team that is not very good. Then they go on the road at Liberty. That's their toughest game. Either Liberty or Sam Houston, those are the toughest games left. And then Jacksonville State, they get at home to end the season. So they do play the toughest teams in the CUSA, but at the same time, if you are a contender in the CUSA, you're going to have to face them. So, that's those are going to be the couple games you want to look out for the rest of the season. Uh, look and see how Western Kentucky does. Look and see how Jacksonville State does. Look and see how Sam Houston does for the rest of the year. Sam Houston, a bit of a surprise at 5-1 on the season. You know, there's going to be these games that are really going to decide the CUSA, and it looks like it's uh, it's a four-team race between Liberty, Jacksonville State, Western Kentucky, and Sam Houston. So, going to be something to look out for towards the end of the season. Let's move forward to talk about the MAC. We mentioned midweek Maction before this, but let's talk about them. I would say the biggest story of the weekend for the MAC was in the Toledo versus Buffalo game. Um, a lot of people sort of wrote off Buffalo, uh, but they're undefeated in conference right now, 2-0 in conference. They've gotten wins over Northern Illinois and Toledo. Um, you know, I- Looking down the rest of their slate, there's not that many bad teams um, for them to face off against. Like there's not uh, teams or I should say, there's not teams that I think they'll struggle with. You have Western Michigan coming up. You have a road game at Ohio that might be tough, but they get both Akron and Kent State, two teams that just flat out are terrible right now. Ball State uh, is another team that's been struggling. And then the only tough games that I see really are against Eastern Michigan, Western Michigan, and Ohio. So not and of those games, Eastern Michigan and Ohio both on the road, but Western Michigan they get at home. So not terrible, home road splits here. I could see Buffalo having a path here. Now, do I think that Buffalo is the best team in the MAC? No, I don't necessarily think they are. I still would give that nod to Toledo. I think that Toledo had an off game this week against Buffalo, but you know, you have a team now with an advantage. They have a great tiebreaker, and of all the 4-2 teams in the MAC, which there are a couple of them, Eastern Michigan, Northern Illinois, Toledo, Ohio, Buffalo, all 4-2 on the season. Out of those, I would say Buffalo has the best conference win. So, you know, it's nothing to sneeze at there. But if you're Toledo, it's a little worrying because, you have this belief that you're going to be a great team. They extended their head coach, Jason Candle, and what do they get to show for it? A bit of an iffy performance and now a conference loss. And then Western Michigan as well has been playing pretty well. 2-0 in the MAC. Granted, looking at Western Michigan, they haven't really played anybody, uh, at least in conference play. Uh, Ball State does not look to be very good. Akron does not look to be very good. Okay. But they are 2-0. And I would say their biggest test right now is coming up this upcoming week against Buffalo. So if you're a MAC football enjoyer, that would probably be a game that you'd want to tune in for because that could have some long-lasting ramifications. Moving on to the Sun Belt. The storylines with the Sun Belt really started off on Thursday with the Coastal Carolina James Madison game. Now, Coastal Carolina has consistently been one of the better Sun Belt teams in the 2020s. I don't think a lot of people are going to argue about that. You know, they had that 3 year stretch of 2020, 2021, 2022, where they had Grayson McCall playing for them. Uh, and then, 2023 for a little bit of it. They've had him dealing with some injuries and stuff like that. But during the Jamie Chadwell era, they were dominant over pretty much every other team in the Sun Belt. But since 2022, there's been a consistent thorn in their side. They just cannot beat James Madison. They can't do it. They're 0-3 against the Dukes in the FBS. 2022, they lose 47-7. 2023, they lose 56 to 14. And then now in 2024, they lose 39-7. Whatever they do, they just cannot get over that hump against James Madison. Uh, and if they want to eventually make their way towards some sort of relevancy in the Sun Belt, a Sun Belt title or anything like that, they have to figure out a way to beat the Dukes. Because if they don't, uh, you're pretty much fresh out of luck there. Now, the Sun Belt West, for those who don't know, the Sun Belt, the only conference that still has divisions right now. Um, Sun Belt East has one undefeated team in conference play. Sun Belt West has three teams that are all undefeated in conference. Both Texas State, ULM, and Louisiana all undefeated in conference. But yeah, if you had told me before the season, hey, ULM is going to be undefeated in conference by week 7, I would say, are you crazy? I would have honestly believed more that ULM wouldn't have a single win rather than that they would be undefeated in conference before the season. But they're 3-0. Only team that's 3-0 in conference. Um, 5-1 overall. I mean, they're playing good football. And it's it's so interesting to me how long it's been since ULM has played good football like this. So I was doing some research on this just to see, and they in their entire FBS program history, dating back to 1994, I want you to guess how many bowl games they've won. Now, based on the tone, you'd assume that the answer is zero, and you would assume right. It is zero. They haven't won a single bowl game. But how many bowl games do you think they've played in? Barrier to get to a bowl game is you have to win 6 games. We've been to one bowl game since 1994. It's not like they've been in a conference with world beaters, right? One bowl game. Now, in that bowl game, they got blown out. It was back in 2012. Um, Again, their only season where they make a bowl game, and they lose to Ohio 45-14. I, I just it's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate for them. I, that sort of puts it in perspective. This team is going to go down in ULM history books, and it's already only week 7. They're 5-1. They have to pick up one more victory for the rest of the season in order to make a bowl game. Some tough games. They do. They have some tough games. South Alabama, Marshall, Texas State, Arkansas State, Louisiana. They got tough games. But if they get one more victory and they make a bowl game, that'd be huge for the community. Because really, college football is a lot more of a community event than you'd initially think just watching it on TV. And that's one of the things that I figured out when I went to the game in person. UMass Amherst is not a football school. They aren't. They're 1-6 on the year. But the community that surrounds UMass Amherst and, just them sort of believing and going and watching the games and seeing everything, seeing a community sort of rally behind that, it's touching. Being at a tailgate, it's touching to see, the impact that this sport has. It's really beautiful. But enough with waxing poetic. Let's talk about one more result in the Sun Belt. Georgia Southern. Now, this was a game that I was scoreboard watching for a little bit. Georgia Southern versus Marshall. There were other games that were going on at that time that I was really watching a little bit more over in the Big Ten, over in the SEC. But I saw that Marshall was blowing the doors off of Georgia Southern. I mean, at one point in this game, Marshall had reached the mythical 99.9% win probability on ESPN. At a point where it was 3rd and 12 with a little bit under 4.5 minutes left in the game. And that was already after Georgia Southern started coming back in this one. At the end of the third, it was 23-3. Heck, with 4 minutes and 46 seconds left, it was 23-3. But within that short time span, not only did Georgia Southern score a safety and 3 touchdowns to take a 1-point lead, they just outright dominated Marshall in just the fourth quarter. What a great comeback. And Georgia Southern is the only team that is undefeated in Sun Belt East. So within the Sun Belt East, they're the only undefeated team. So it does have long-lasting ramifications. Let's talk Mountain West football. So The late night game was Boise State at Hawaii. Kicked off at 11, you know, on late into the night. And the real story of any Boise State game this year has been Ashton Jeanty. If Jeanty can get going, you're done for. And to Hawaii's credit, they kept him in check for a decent amount of the game. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that they kept him in check for enough of the game. Jeanty went for 217 yards on the ground and then caught another three passes for 20 yards and a touchdown. So, to the credit of Hawaii, they kept him to only 7 yards a carry, which doesn't sound great, but considering Ashton Jeanty and how he's been playing, that is great. But even still, Boise State picked up a 28-7 victory. And then the other thing that I wanted to touch on within the Mountain West was the game between Colorado State and San Jose State. Now, SJSU coming into this game was 4-1. Their only loss at that point was to Washington State on a Friday night. And meanwhile, Colorado State had a couple of losses. Colorado State had lost to Oregon State. They'd lost to Colorado. They had lost to Texas. So yes, they came into the game 2-3, but they hadn't played a Mountain West game at that point. They hadn't played against a team that was, I would say, on their own caliber. They beat up on Northern Colorado. They beat up on what we found out later to be a really terrible UTEP team. But what about a team that is sort of on their level? And we found out that Colorado State can compete. That they are, I would say, improving from what we saw them as last year. Now, their next couple games are pretty winnable. At Air Force, it's an Air Force team that's really struggled. Versus New Mexico, another team that has sort of struggled as well. Uh, at Nevada, tougher game than we would have expected at the start of the year, but I would still probably give the edge to Colorado State there. Versus Wyoming, their toughest game left on their schedule is a road game at Fresno before they finish off with a game against Utah State. There's a good chance that Colorado State, based on the luck of the draw, can make a run at a Mountain West title appearance. You know, they avoid UNLV. They avoid Boise State. Meanwhile, UNLV and Boise meeting up during the season. They're one of four teams that doesn't have a conference loss right now, along with a San Diego State team that also has to play Boise State, also has to play UNLV. And given the luck of the draw, Colorado State could be making the Mountain West championship game. Really, the only sort of drawback here is that road game against Fresno. But Fresno State's been struggling recently. So, something to look out for. And, for San Jose State, uh, this game they started a different quarterback than they have been. They started Walker Eget instead of Emmett Brown. I'm not sure exactly the reasoning behind that. As much Eget did get some playing time in the previous game as well. Pardon me. Yeah, he got some playing time in the previous game, but uh, really, I would say a bit of an underwhelming performance. Through an interception, decent completion percentage, but you know, Emmett Brown's been winning you guys games. Emmett Brown threw a touchdown pass, so I don't understand why you go away from him and go over to Walker Eget. It's not like he's been turning the ball over a lot. He's been pretty good so far, 16 and 4 touchdown to interception ratio, thrown for about 1,500 yards. I don't know. Food for thought. But another story within the Mountain West, uh, before we move on, San Diego State, little fourth quarter rally, able to beat Wyoming. Wyoming, surprisingly bad this year. You know, I didn't expect them to be very good. That being said, uh, there were some expectations for this team, and they just have not handled the heat. Losses to Arizona State, Idaho, BYU. Those Arizona State and BYU losses really aging well. Same with the North Texas loss. But, you know, they don't seem like a team that's really found their identity yet, ranking towards the bottom of almost every category. Offense, defense, you name it. But, Danny O'Neil, he's been okay so far for uh for San Diego State. Again, he's only a freshman, so certainly time to develop, and he should be, continuing to improve. But a good sign to be 2-0 in conference and 3-3, looking to make a bowl game over there in San Diego. Now, for the ACC, a little bit of a slow week for them. Uh, we had a couple games that I do want to highlight. The ranked ACC teams both won. So Pitt able to win against Cal, Clemson dominant against Wake Forest, SMU had a bye week. So there weren't any upsets in the ACC, but at the same time, you know, the teams that are on the fringe, right? There are a couple, close games with some of those teams that are sort of like looking to make a push. The sort of mid-tier ACC teams at this point in the season. Um, Syracuse gets a road victory at NC State. Louisville gets back in the win column over Virginia after a late touchdown. And then we have the game that I want to highlight the most, Georgia Tech versus North Carolina. Now, Georgia Tech's had an up and down season so far. They started off with that big high of winning in Dublin against Florida State, knocking off a top 10 team. People sort of forgot about them after they lost to Syracuse, lost that ranking next to their name. But this is a Jackets team that's been consistently solid. Yes, they had a loss against Syracuse. Yes, they had a loss against Louisville. But other than that, they've really just uh, been pretty productive on the ground. Um, they're ranked 25th in the nation for rushing yards right now. Uh, 5-2, so they're very close to making a bowl game. Now they have a tough backstretch of their schedule, but if they can get a win for one of these games, then we're looking at a completely different story here. They got a game against Notre Dame this week. That should be one that should be pretty interesting as well. But yeah, big performance on the ground. Um, Haynes King, Jamal Haynes, both accounted for 2 touchdowns, in total 371 rushing yards. For North Carolina, you dropped to 0-3 in conference, 3-4 overall. I get that you're playing with a backup quarterback for the entire season. Your starter goes down. That's not the answer. I know. It's a tough situation. But realistically, you should have a backup that can still play. And starting off 3-0, dropping the most recent 4 games is going to be a really tough look. And I would be surprised if Mac Brown sticks around for much longer. He's getting up there in age. Might want to hang up the boots soon. Let's move over to the Big 12. Some of the teams in the Big 12, uh, at least the ranked teams, uh, had a very interesting week. You have teams like Iowa State, who pretty convincingly beat West Virginia. There were some questions about that. Some people called it a trap game. They won pretty convincingly over the Mountaineers. BYU, another team that got scrutinized, got questioned. Can they beat Arizona? They could. 41-19. They dominated that game. Then you look at, Kansas State, Colorado. Kansas State, close game. Colorado, better team than we expected. But they found a way to win 31-28. So you would say, well, Zeke, if all of the ranked teams won, then why not just say all the ranked teams in the Big 12 won? Well, all the ranked teams in the Big 12 that played on Saturday won. There was a sneaky little Friday game thrown in there. Arizona State hosting Utah. Now, the story with Utah this season has been Cam Rising, or really the lack thereof. He's been off the field more than he's been on it for the past, heck, couple of years. Can Utah win without Cam Rising? I've talked about this a couple episodes ago. The answer to me is pretty clear. The answer is no. They're not the same team without him. But at the same time, if Cam Rising isn't himself, then they're still not the same team. He clearly looked like he should not have been out there on Friday night. He looked completely off from what I remember about Cam Rising. He didn't look like he had a lot of drive on the football. The decision making wasn't there. It looked like they had made a sort of puppet of what Cam Rising looks like and just thrown that out there. So it didn't work. Arizona State, huge victory. They're 5-1 now. And a team that's making a lot of noise. Cam Rising, 3 interceptions. Cost his team the game. So you look at the Big 12, and that's a conference that looks pretty wide open to me. There are a bunch of teams that could make a run at the Big 12. You look at it this way: BYU, Iowa State, Texas Tech, all 3 of those teams still undefeated in conference. You look at the one-loss teams, Kansas State, Arizona State, Cincinnati, Colorado, West Virginia, plenty of teams that could get a win, could steal a win away from someone. It's not over yet. There's still so much football left to be played, and the Big 12, I would say, is pretty much wide open. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about what could have been game of the year, but at least game of this week. Oregon, Ohio State. Number two versus number three in Autzen Stadium, raucous environment, crowd is rolling. Let's get a victory. There was some controversy there. There was. Oregon had 12 men on the field during one of the final couple seconds, and that play, they called, the penalty for 12 men on the field, but the time was still running off. So basically, Oregon got a free play uh, on defense and took some more time off the clock. A slide by Will Howard in the final moments sealed their fate, but the story of that game was Oregon played clean football. They didn't turn the ball over. They're pretty effective. Uh, Going from running the ball to passing the ball, they balanced it out. And overall, it was a fantastic game. It's one of those games that you point at when people say, "What's college football about?" Go right, say, "Hey, right here, this game right here." Um, but yeah, I turned that one on in my suite, and everyone's eyes were glued to the TV. Even people who I know don't like college football were curious about how that one was going to end. Um, Very, very good game. And then there was another great game in the Big Ten earlier on in the day, Penn State versus USC. Overtime in LA, and Penn State got the victory after USC missed a field goal in their overtime possession. Now, USC coming into the season was ranked. Now they're sitting at 3-3 with three close losses. Might be danger mode for the Trojans. They have some games to rebound from this. A game against Maryland, Rutgers, Washington, but some tough games coming up towards the latter end of the schedule. A game against Nebraska could be tough. Uh, Notre Dame is going to be a tough game for them. Washington actually could be pretty tough. The road game at UCLA, I think they're going to win that one. But, three close losses to Michigan, Minnesota, and Penn State. Certainly not where USC wants to be at this point in the season. They don't want to be 15th in the Big Ten. It's just not something that program wants. And, if they have another off season, right? If they can't turn this season around, does the seat become a little bit warmer for Lincoln Riley? Could be. Then another sneaky good game. Big Ten actually had a lot of really good games. Now, this one looked like it was going to be a blowout. It really did. Illinois versus Purdue. Purdue this season has been rough. Going into the game, they were 1-4. Uh, they have a quarterback switch during this game, but at halftime, it was 24-3, 27-3 at one point in the third quarter. But slowly but surely, Purdue started to inch right back into this one. And eventually, Purdue even took the lead and had to make Illinois kick a game tying field goal to force overtime. Now, from there, uh, Illinois got a touchdown. Purdue scored, tried to go for two, didn't work out, but a, a good performance there by Purdue and by their freshman quarterback, Ryan Brown. And I'd expect to see Brown starting for the rest of the season. Unless something really happens, Hudson Card just was not getting the job done. Just wasn't getting the job done. Seven touchdowns, four interceptions. You can do better. And I think Purdue's found better. So I'm going to be looking at Purdue football a little bit more closely. They have a tough end to their schedule, though. Game against Oregon, game at Ohio State, game versus Penn State, game at Indiana. No, that is a tough. That is about as tough as a Big Ten schedule can get right now. Uh, but I think that they have something that they can look forward to for next year. And then finally, I want to give a quick shout out to Wisconsin. They blew out Rutgers, and their offense is showing signs of life that it really wasn't before. I think that they have a game against Northwestern this week, but the big matchup to look out for in 2 weeks, Wisconsin plays against Penn State. So I wouldn't count the Badgers out just yet. Luke Fickell proved when at Cincinnati that he's a good coach. He'll have his guys ready for that game. Pretty confident about that. And then finally, let's touch on the SEC. Let's, just starting it off, let's talk about the Red River rivalry game. Now, in the recent history, the Red River rivalry has been close, 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 right? You've had overtime games, multi-overtime games. You've had, game-ending kicks. There's only been two examples in recent memory where the game has not been like a one-score game. And that has been 2022, where it was 49 to nothing. Texas sort of dominated. And then this year, where Texas also dominated. Oklahoma looked completely out of their element. They got embarrassed. 34 to 3. Texas is playing really good football. And I think that's why they're still, spoiler alert, still ranked number one. But for Oklahoma, you're looking at this sort of jump over to the SEC. You have two losses in conference play now. Where do you go from there? And that's really a question. Also, just let's talk about this. LSU versus Ole Miss. This is the big game on ABC on Saturday night. Overtime victory for LSU. Now they have no losses in conference play. Their only loss came in week one against USC in Vegas. Don't get me wrong, they got some tough games. LSU does not have easy sledding coming up. They have games against Texas A&M at Kyle Field, and then they host Alabama. But they shouldn't overlook a game at Arkansas in Fayetteville. That's an Arkansas team that knocked off Tennessee not too long ago. So there's stuff there. Before they finish off the season with a road game in the Swamp at Florida, and then Vanderbilt, who's been playing good football as well, and then finish the season against Oklahoma. But LSU could make a sneaky run in the SEC, try to make the championship game there. Now, Vanderbilt, just mentioned them. They beat Kentucky. They're at 4 wins right now. Uh, they have a pretty easy opponent coming up this week, if I remember correctly. You know, that's right. They're this week they're playing Ball State. But if they can take a game off of Texas, Auburn, South Carolina, LSU, or Tennessee, then we will see Vanderbilt in a bowl game for the first time since 2018. And that's I can say I was looking at some of Vanderbilt's football history, and they really haven't had much to go off of. Um, there really just hasn't been anything to look at and think of in a positive manner. You know, again, looking at the bowl games, they haven't won a bowl game since 2013. They haven't won a bowl game since James Franklin was still their coach. So just even making a bowl game is huge for that program. And then finally, before we touch on the AP poll, Alabama and Tennessee, they both won. But even though they won, they really struggled. And it's not like the competition was great. Uh, I would say that, two lower rung teams in the SEC right now really held close to both of those teams. South Carolina, just one interception away from upsetting Alabama. You know, it was a final score of 27-25. But Alabama's really got to get things going in the right direction here. We have a game that's coming up against Tennessee this weekend in what some have dubbed as the underwhelming bowl. I really like the name of that one. But then you look at Tennessee, and they played a close game against Florida. Um, just there wasn't anything to really latch onto. Nico looked a little disappointing. Something broke in Tennessee, and something broke in Alabama. The real question is, in their matchup against each other, like who's gonna break first? And I guess we'll have to just wait and see on that. But let's pop over to the AP poll, and we can go through that as starting off at the top, we have Texas. Um, they're still holding strong after they dominated over Oklahoma. Oregon up to number two. Penn State leapfrogs Ohio State, who drops down to four. Interesting that Ohio State's still ranked above teams like Georgia and Miami, who's also undefeated. But, both of these teams having their struggles. Didn't mention Georgia sort of struggled against Mississippi State. They won, but it's Mississippi State, so, take it with a grain of salt. Alabama uh, at seven, despite playing a close game against South Carolina. Meanwhile, Tennessee wins their game against Florida and drops by 3 spots. So that's an interesting thing that the polls did to them. LSU back in the top 10 for the first time in a while. They're up 5 spots to number 8. Iowa State getting some love now. Top 10 for the Cyclones. Clemson, top 10 team again as well. Notre Dame blows out Stanford, and they are losing spots. Fighting Irish really suffering from the strength of schedule right now. So they got to sort of keep on winning their games. I don't really see a path for them if they lose another game here. BYU continuing to rise. Same with A&M. Ole Miss, big ol' stumble after their second loss, down 9 spots to number 18. Missouri climbing up as well after a win against UMass Amherst. Getting some love. SMU rising 4 off of their bye week. But this is the most important story here. Army and Navy both ranked. It's been a while since we've seen the service academies getting this kind of love from the AP poll. Vanderbilt sitting at 26 with Nebraska, Arizona State, both behind them. Utah going from being ranked to not even receiving 10 votes. They're sitting at 7 votes on the poll right now. USC still receiving 5. So interesting stuff over there. Washington State, their only loss is to a good Texas Tech team. That's also receiving some AP poll votes. And then realistically, I would say the teams that should be ranked right now that aren't are Arizona State. They should be in. Michigan should not be in the top 25 teams right now. They're not playing like it. They have 2 losses and their offense looks all out of sorts. I would probably put either Vanderbilt, Arizona State, or Nebraska in over them. But those are my thoughts. Tell me about what your thoughts are. I would love to hear what your opinion on week 7 was, what games you're looking forward to for week 8. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment down below if you feel so inclined, and I will see you all in the next video.